Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to be showing you a disgusting game of chess. A game of chess played at an elite chess tournament between two players you may know, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hans Niemann. Now, this is a rivalry slash feud that in 2026 has been taken to the next level. The two of them played a one-on-one match set up by Hans, and they tied that match 4-4. Afterward, they both had things to say, but in particular, Jan Nepomniachtchi had things to say, and then they didn't shake hands at the next tournament that they both played at. And then they've got paired against each other in that tournament, which is exactly what I'm going to be showing you today. So we have a situation, both guys are saying things about each other, they're paired in a game, and at the end, there is going to be quite a reveal. So I will be taking you through the game and then giving you an interesting plot twist at the very end. This was a crazy game of chess. Now, back in the day, crazy game of chess meant a million sacrifices, brutal checkmate. This was a very different type of game. So Jan Nepomniachtchi opened the game with e4. He is an e4 player. Hans responds with e5. Generally speaking, Hans Niemann, when he is playing with the black pieces, he is looking for simple and straightforward solutions, and e4, e5 gives you exactly that. Knight f3 and knight c6, no gambits, no silly stuff, no scotch, no Vienna, no four knights. Bishop b5. A Spanish. Ruy Lopez. Black now has a million options to choose from. Hans is a big fan, actually, of the Berlin. He plays knight to f6, targeting the pawn on e4 quite frequently. But in this game, he chooses the classical pawn to a6. The bishop always slides back. These two moves are included all the time in the Spanish, and Black now has the option to throw in the move b5. Knight f6 attacks the pawn in the center. Now it is White who has the choice of playing d3, which is not the most popular variation, or playing castles, which is the most popular variation. And now it is Black's turn to make a decision whether to play bishop to e7 or put the bishop out a little bit more actively with b5 and bishop c5. We have bishop e7. Rook e1 defends the pawn in the middle of the board. b5, bishop to b3, and castles. And now, you will notice the main thing in the Spanish, the mainline Spanish that has been played thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions upon millions of times. Black never touched the d-pawn. White in this position wants to play c3 and d4. If White plays c3, there are positions, like right now, where Black can play d5 immediately. And d5 is known as the Marshal. And in the Marshal, White wins the pawn in the center like this, but Black gets very good counterplay on these diagonals, and in the modern age of computers, these positions are quite difficult for White to handle, and generally Black is more than okay. So, what White does in this position, rather than playing c3, is White plays what's known as the anti-Marshal. White plays different variations here where d5 no longer has any power, okay? And one of those lines is a4. This is called an anti-Marshal variation because you just target this pawn. Now, this position has been reached many times before by Jan Nepomniachtchi, including in his World Championship match against none other than Magnus Carlsen. That happened in 2021. Hans plays b4. Okay, so Hans advances the pawn forward. He doesn't want to open up the queen side. Now White cannot so easily develop the knight, and if White plays c3, Black will take, open up the b file, etc., etc. So now b4 is on the board, and Jan plays d4 instantly. He does not prepare it with c3 anymore. He just goes d4 straight away. One of the things about playing d4 straight away in this position is that Black could potentially go take, 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 and if you take with the queen, there is this unfortunate move c5 and c4, and you get your bishop trapped. So, by doing it like this, now you enable this trade. So if this trade were to happen, White would be very happy. Black would no longer have the option to trap the bishop. That is why you play a4 followed by b4. Hans, meanwhile, defending the center of the board like this. And already, things take a little bit of a strange turn from the opening because you would think, well, you advance in the middle and you attack. Most of us would do that. You know, maybe you play h3, preventing the pin. You got to develop the bishop and the knight. Actually, Nepo does something here that when I first saw it, I thought, oh, he just doesn't want to play Hans. He just wants to end the game. Like, he just wants to make a draw because he took in the middle, and then Hans traded the knights with him, and then Jan traded those knights. He didn't even, like, develop one of these pieces. He traded this, and then he traded the queens. And I'm just thinking, like, it's the 12th move. Why did he do this? Why did he trade all of these pieces? I mean, you don't trade all the pieces so early unless you just don't want to play the guy. And I'm thinking, well, he obviously doesn't like Hans. He just doesn't want to play him. Boy, was I wrong. So this was a real lesson in the fact that you can trade a bunch of pieces in a chess game, and yet what you're about to witness is, like, heinous. Like, the rest of this game, despite no brutal checkmate, is alien level chess. Knight to d2 is played. Knight d2 is played because you want to develop your knight, obviously, right? Hans, in this position, again, has several choices. He can move the bishop, but he senses that, you know, he's going to come under some threat now, so he reactivates, you know, the bishop to the c5 square. Instead of putting it on e7, he puts it on c5. He targets the soft pawn on f2. Anything that's only protected by a king is pretty soft, because, you know, the king is not much of a defender if overwhelmed with attackers. And Hans wants to play knight to g4. Jan responds knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. And Hans responds knight to g4, attacking the pawn on f2. And this is a very strange position because white does not have an easy way to defend this pawn. Normally, you would think, well, you just defend the pawn with the rook, and then after knight takes, rook takes, bishop takes, king takes, white is very happy. White gets 2 pieces for the rook. And 2 pieces for a rook, a knight and bishop for a rook, is a very good deal. I always say, like, 8 times out of 10. But that's not the idea at all. The idea is that after rook f1, knight f2, rook f2, black simply checkmates white. It's just, the rook is pinned to the king can't escape off the back rank, the knight has to block, and the game would end like that. So this is actually a really unpleasant thing. You have to play bishop to e3. But if you play bishop to e3, the guy is going to take your bishop and just shatter your pawn structure. Like, he's going to do this, and I mean, this looks very ugly. Why would Nepo do this to himself? Why? His pawn structure is utterly immobile. Well, there is actually a lot more to this than what meets the eye. I mean, this looks terrible. The pawn structure is something like we've never seen. But if you actually take a moment here and you go past, you know, level 1 analysis, you go, okay, well, what's actually going on? Black has 3 pieces on the last rank. White actually has more pieces developed. And then you start looking at how these pieces are interacting. The knight is targeting the pawn. And the knight is guarding the pawn, which means h3 is coming. You cannot guard this pawn with f6 because you would blunder your king. So the only way to protect this pawn is rook e8, which just looks awful, because then I'm going to do the exact same thing back to you, except in this position, I'm probably going to go for this, and this pawn's always going to be in my line of sight. So that looks like a potential very unpleasant thing to blossom from this position. So it's not a very nice situation here developing, right? So what is black supposed to do here, right? Like, black probably wants to trade the bishop, but if he does that, maybe he wants the rook to support it. So the position's pretty uncomfortable. But like I said, at the end of this game, I'm going to show you why this is not just a disgusting game of chess. So Hans here during the game spent half an hour coming up with his next move. Because again, it's a long game, 90 minutes, and he went rook to d6, which is actually the top move of the computer. So it's the best move, right? The point is that white is going to play h3. Obviously, that was white's idea, right? He's going to kick out the knight, and then he's going to probably pick up the pawn. But if you do that, this pawn is hanging, so it's not so clear what to do. Now, Nepo here thinks for a little bit. He has many options. He can attack the knight, put a rook in the middle, try to trade, right? Because this would be nice for white to get total dominance of the file. Open files. Rooks love open files. So offering a trade of rooks with rook d1. Oh, sorry, that was the move that Nepo played. But offering a trade with rook d1 would make sense. And black should not trade the rook. You, in general, should not trade rooks with your opponent if they then get full control of the file. Jan in the game played bishop d5, which is a move that doesn't make any sense. Why would he play a move that attacks the rook? I understand if you're watching this going, well, I mean, most beginners think I attack the rook, and if he takes me, I take, so it must be a good move, which is fine enough. But black is going to play pawn to c6. Now your bishop is hanging, so you probably think, oh, Jan has some really sophisticated maneuver for the bishop. No, Jan just goes back. So Jan, in this position, basically just gave his opponent an extra move. He said, I don't want to make a move, but you have to go c6. Why would he do that? Well, you're about to find out. You're about to find out why that was absolutely genius. So Hans continues with his plan here. His plan is, this is Jan's best piece. I probably should trade it. Can't really blame the guy. That bishop is very powerful, and now Jan is going to have to trade the bishop. Except he had all of this worked out already. What am I talking about? Well, the move c6 not only destabilized the rook, it also made a weakness. And here, Jan played rook to d1. Rook to d1? But he's going to lose this pawn. And there's going to be a rook hanging at the end. Why is Jan not attacking the knight? Hans spends a little bit of time. I just told you, you don't want to take and give your opponent dominant control of the only open file. It facilitates infiltration into your position. It's not a good thing. So Hans reinforces his rook. This is a very, very good move. Now the rooks are actually threatening the rook here. So we have rook takes rook, and Jan takes here. Okay, obviously, you're not going to take with the rook because you don't want to surrender control of the file. So both guys have terrible pawn structure. Both guys have weaknesses, like both knights can jump in, threaten both of these pawns, and actually, in the end, it was Hans who takes over the d file. But Jan knew all of this was going to happen. Actually, this position is very challenging for black, because here, white can play King F1. King F1 on the board. Targeting King E2 and pawn to H3, removing the target over here. And then maybe you move your rook as well. So bringing the king to the middle in preparation for this endgame. Hans drops the knight back to F6, targeting the pawn on E4. Now, this next phase is crazy. Nepo just gives him the pawn. He just gives it to him. Why? He's not even defending the pawn. Black is now up a pawn with dominant control of the board. Now, if you take on E5 here, black gets in with the rook. In the endgame, if you can get a rook on the second rank of the board, you're dominating. The rook is going to get everything. The king has to go here. The knight is going to jump back. Black's just going to eat all the pawns. So in this position, down a pawn, Jan Nepomniachtchi trades the rook. So if the rook takes him, he is then going to target this next, and that pawn, the pawn which 7 moves ago, he baited Hans Niemann into putting on the c6 square. We are now entering the endgame phase where that pawn is going to be a liability. And you can't protect this pawn. This pawn you can protect, but then I'm going to get into the position and keep attacking your pawns. Which is why in this position, Hans Niemann plays rook d5, which is a nice little move. Rook d5 is a nice move. You want to trade rooks, but you want to improve your pawn structure. Unfortunately, this does not really help you. Because now, Jan Nepomniachtchi trades the rooks and plays knight takes pawn. This is a knight and 6 pawn each endgame. Most of us would fall asleep here. But it's not so simple. Who wins in a knight and 6 pawn endgame? Ideally, the person that wins an extra pawn and then promotes a pawn. You have to promote a pawn. Horses can't checkmate kings alone. You're going to have to win the pawns and guarantee some sort of pawn promotion. To facilitate victory, you need to have a more active knight that has better prospects to attack the pawns. both knights are pretty active, but this knight has a much better prospect in attacking the pawns. And then one side has to have a more active king. This king is right next to the middle of the board. This little king walk that Nepo did brought him 2 squares closer, whereas this king still needs to make 2 moves, and that king doesn't have time. Because that pawn that Hans moved there 10 moves ago that was baited by Nepo is a real problem. He now has to move this pawn. The position is still equal, but the computer doesn't account for the fact that, practically speaking, it's hanging on a knife's edge. Hans is walking a tightrope. He is extremely precariously placed here. Now, what do you do here with white? Do you continue the knight journey? Do you try to go to the base, right, to attack the pawn on a6? If you play knight c6, the king is going to come in, and you get over here. I'm going to bring the king. You're going to win the pawn. But actually, you can't get out. You actually cannot escape. Your knight ends up trapped on the edge of the board. So, since you cannot do that, I'm going to play king. And you would think king d3 into the middle, targeting everybody. No, Jan goes this way. Why? Because when the knight goes there, the king will go this way. The king is going to get into the middle anyway. This is wild. I mean, this is endgame god level of play. The king comes closer for Hans Niemann. He has no other move. The knight, this is not a fork, this is protected. The knight, on the next move for Nepo, goes to c6. Now, the white king is threatening to infiltrate. If the white king gets here, the game is over. So it's going to come down to whether the king can stop the pawn or not. Do you bring the king? What do? He brings the king. Nepo arrives on the b8 square. The knight has traversed the entire freaking board. If you just look at the journey of that knight, right? Knight on f3 on the second move of the game. Then that knight actually got traded off, right? So the other knight replaced it on f3, and then some short while later ends up on the corner of the board. Now, if black tries to save this pawn, that gives white enough time to go king f4 and king e5 and simply win. You have dominant position. You're going to win the pawn on a5. You're going to win the game. So knight b8. Hans now goes king d8, loses the pawn, and blocks the knight from getting out, which is apparently a mistake, which shows how practically challenging this game really was. King c8, a move away from winning the knight. He's a move away from winning the knight. How can this be wrong? How can this possibly be incorrect? Apparently, he needed to go king d7. He needed to create a wall for the knight, but he needed to not go win the knight. King f4, king d6. This is apparently how black holds this position, which is crazy to me because white just has a passed a pawn. So the a pawn's going to move. You still can't go to c6 because I'm going to go to e5. So I don't understand. The king is supposed to stand on the d6 square, not allowing the knight out of the position and not allowing the king in. Hans goes after the knight. But Nepo planned this the entire time. Nepo planned that the knight, it was a Trojan horse. He was going to sacrifice it on the edge of the board. How can you sacrifice a knight in a knight endgame? You only have a king and pawn left. Yeah. King f4. What? King b7. King e... Jan loses his knight for the center pawn. But now, Nepo has 2 extra pawns for the knight. And when the knight moves, because it's hanging, he's going to win another pawn. And then he might even win another pawn. So he might have 4 extra pawns against the horse. And the horse is not going to be able to stop his pawns. The knight and the king are not going to be able to stop these pawns. It's just not going to happen. Knight f6 back. King takes c5. Knight to g4. Which of these 2 pawns do you think you should save? Hopefully you answered correctly. You gotta save the e-pawn because it's going. And if it goes, one of these 2 pieces is going to have to come back, and then that pawn's going to go. And then this pawn and this pawn are going to go. If you lose this pawn, not only do you not win the endgame, you might actually lose it. So you have to go e4. Now, if Hans plays knight e3, that's adorable. The pawn just runs away. He doesn't have enough time to do anything. So he's going to take the pawn on h2, and Jan's pawn can either go to e5 immediately, or he can take on b4. This pawn is now 4 squares away from queening. Yes, black has time to advance, but he needs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves to get there. He's not going to get it. If g5 appears, e5 comes in, knight here, e6, knight f6. I'm going to bring my king, you're going to bring your pawn. I'm going to go here, you're going to bring your pawn. I'm going to go here attacking the knight, you're going to have to move the knight. And now I'm going to go to f5. And you're defenseless. My king is running around the board, humiliating you. You go to a5, I can even go to b3. You're just never going to win my pawns. Ever. King here, I'm going to take. King here, I'm going to take. I can do whatever I want. I can promote the e pawn, I can promote the g pawn, I can promote the a pawn. The second you go here, a5. You take this pawn, a6, g4. You're just not fast enough. I'm going to freeze your knight on the corner of the board like this, and then I'm just going to win the game. So, king takes b4, Hans runs back knight to g4, and now Nepo has to find the best move in the position, and the best move is king c5, to go help out his pawn, to stay active, or come back to the middle if you need. King b6 is not playable. Black plays h5, looking for a little bit of counterplay. King d4 is the best move. e5, king e4, king f4 is coming. Hans goes to win the pawn. Jan says no thank you, and that's the end of the game. That is basically going to be the end of the game here. Knight back to f6, e5, the knight goes back, e6, the knight is stuck defending the pawn, king e4, king f4, king g5 is going to win the pawn on h4. The second that the king walks over too close, Nepo plays a5, king here, a6. Hans is going to stop the pawn, and he's going to get really close here. But it doesn't matter because the knight can't ever leave, and I'm just going to win because I have more pawns. King g5, king f5 strong, g4 strong, king e4 played, and Hans Niemann just resigns. He resigns in this position because either white can run this way with the king, or he can just push his pawns, b4. And black, he can't do anything. Like, if you sit back and do nothing, I play c4. Here, I play a7. Now the knight can't move. I play c5. Second you go here, I come forward, or I push. Play b6. King e5, king f6. It's a delicate process, but he's going to win the game. That was a crazy game. Like, Jan Nepomniachtchi, from this position, applied some absolutely brutal pressure. He ran the knight to the corner of the board where it perished. Then his king snuck in. Every move logically preceded the one, logically followed the one that preceded it. And he won a crazy game. And given the fact that these guys are on a non-handshake level right now, it must feel really good to win a game of chess like this. Now, I told you at the beginning of the video that I would reveal something to you. I am now revealing it to you, and I would like you to pay attention to what's on your screen. As I click through the moves here, you're going to notice that the guys start the game with 90 minutes on the clock. Every time they make a move, they gain 30 seconds. For now, they're both in the opening. They comfortably know this position. Hans started thinking on move 13 and 14. He spent a little bit of time. They went here. Now, up until this point, there have been games played in this position. Right here, we leave known territory. Hans thinks for 20 minutes and plays the best move. Jan Nepomniachtchi, in this game, never thought. Rook d1 on the board, 25 minutes, 25 moves, 27 moves, 29 moves, 30 moves, 33, 34, 30. He spent time in this game on the 36th move of the game when he already was in a completely winning endgame. Yes, this kills a little bit of the aura. Like, oh my god, this was his prep. I understand. But there is something to be said for even, like, analyzing this before. Grandmasters nowadays go somewhere in a position that has literally never been played. This move has been played like one time 10 years ago in an email game, from what I could see. Nobody has ever played bishop d5 followed by going back. The fact that these guys have this somewhere in their brain and their analysis is wicked. It's absolutely wicked. I mean, I can't even... And then to convert it is just... It's absurd. It's completely absurd. This is why we can't have chess games going for 90 minutes anymore. We need them to be going for 30. So you can't... Honestly, it wouldn't have even helped in this game. Nepo would have still had the whole thing memorized. Chess in 2026 is crazy. This is an absurd victory. Absurd. That's all I have for you today. Man solve chess with this game. All right? Get out of here.